So tonight's lesson is from John chapter 11, one of the most remarkable chapters in our Bible. It tells the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. So as we start here in John chapter 11, now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. So notice right off the bat that Jesus identifies the town by the people who are in the town. It's not by the features of the town, it's by the people who were there. So the town of Bethany was the town of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Martha, you remember, was the Martha we met in the Gospels earlier, who was the one who, when Jesus entered into her house, she complained, "Lord, my sister is sitting listening. I'm doing all the work." And Jesus told her, she chose the better path. That's Martha. Martha would be the firstborn, busy, always involved in something. Mary, it says here in verse 2, Mary was the one who anointed Jesus' feet with oil and wiped his feet with her hair. We see this story in the other Gospels where Mary is not named. There's maybe 6 Marys in the New Testament. And so John identifies that Mary who wiped Jesus' feet with her hair. And Lazarus, their brother, we don't know much about Lazarus, but we do know that Lazarus was loved by his sisters. Both sisters. The sisters were opposite, but yet they both loved Lazarus. And Lazarus was loved by Jesus. Now, Lazarus was sick. So verse 3, therefore his sisters sent unto Jesus, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. These things do not fit together in our mind. That we are loved of the Lord and we are sick, this is hard to reconcile. How do you connect those two things together? Being loved of the Lord and being yet you're sick. And this word sick isn't just sick. This word sick means that Lazarus was failing fast. He was fading. He was fading from the scene. He was desperately ill. We don't know why he was ill. We don't know if it was a COVID virus. We don't know if he got into an accident. Maybe it was a slow-moving cancer. It doesn't say. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Jesus loved him. Jesus loved Lazarus. And now Jesus comments on this sickness when he hears it from the messenger. Verse 4, when Jesus heard that he was sick, Jesus said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. I'm going to hold my comments on verse 4 for a few minutes. Continue on here with verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha, Mary, her sister, and Lazarus. So in case we didn't catch it the first time, John gives us an editorial note here. See that Jesus loved this family. And he does that to soften up next verse, which is coming here, verse 7. After that, Jesus, verse 6. When he heard therefore that he was sick, Jesus abode 2 more days. So if it didn't compute when Jesus was sick, when Lazarus was sick, and Jesus loved him, now it doesn't compute that Jesus stayed 2 more days in that place when Lazarus was dying, sick. He continued there. Martha and Mary, through these days, their hope was waning. They were waiting on the Lord. They were waiting on a miracle. They knew that this miracle could happen if only Jesus was there. Jesus would give them a miracle. They knew it. But Jesus never came. The longer the time went, the smaller the hope got. This hope got smaller and smaller and smaller until there was no hope left. Lazarus died. Lazarus died. They were hopeless. Totally hopeless. And into this situation, into this absolutely dark, forlorn, and hopeless situation, if I could paraphrase verse 7, Jesus says, all right, boys, let's ride. Jesus is going into that situation where there is no hope whatsoever. He is marching in. And there is something about this narrative that touches our soul, our very heart. As Jesus walks into this narrative, this has been cribbed and copied over and over again in movies and books and plays. The hero comes into the hopeless situation, but this is the real deal. This is how it really happened. That Jesus goes into that hopeless situation. Verse 8, his disciples said unto him, Master, the Jews of late thought to stone thee. So not only is Jesus going into a hopeless situation, but the people want to kill him. The authorities want to kill him. They want to stone him. So the plot deepens and thickens. Verse 9, Jesus answers with this kind of enigmatical answer. Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walketh in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. That's kind of confusing. What is Jesus saying here? Jesus is saying that the day is 12 hours long. There's 12 hours of light and there's 12 hours of darkness, because God ordained it to be so. And God, not only did he ordain the days of light and the days of darkness, the times of darkness, but God ordained the hours of our life. And Jesus knew that until his hour was up, he was watched over. He was safe. He was safe from harm. And so are we. And so were his disciples. Verse 10, but if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. See, the world doesn't have Jesus. The world doesn't have the light. The world stumbles. The world has a fear of death. A mortal fear of death. Continuing in verse 11, these things said he, and after that he said, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep. Now notice how Jesus talks about Lazarus. Now Jesus knows that Lazarus is dead. But as he talks about Lazarus, you would think that he's just laying right here. Our friend Lazarus sleepeth. Very common thing. But Jesus is talking about Lazarus as if he is here, and Lazarus is still here. When we talk about somebody who's died, we talk about them in the past tense. But Jesus, not Jesus. He is still, Lazarus is still alive to Jesus. He is just sleeping. Verse 12, then said Jesus to his disciples, then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleeps, he should do well. So the disciples didn't understand. They didn't get it. Verse 13, but Jesus spoke of his death. But they thought he had spoken of taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Just like you would explain to a small child, Lazarus is dead. And now the disciples understand. Now this verse 15. Look what Jesus says here. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent that ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. So very few times in the Bible Do you hear Jesus say, I was glad? And here we have Jesus being glad. Why is he glad? Because Lazarus is dead? We're going to come to the end of this mystery. But it is a mystery. You don't understand. Jesus is glad because Lazarus is dead. For your sakes, I am glad for your sakes that I was not there. And now look at this at the middle of verse 15. To the intent that ye may believe. Aha. That's a clue to what's going on. Let's go back to verse 4. Let's get to verse 4 earlier. Let me remind you what verse 4 said. Jesus said, this sickness is not unto death. I don't want to focus on that part. But for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. So you see, when Jesus says that he is glad that he was not there, so that we may believe, and we said earlier that this sickness was not unto death, but was for the glory of God. These two things are different sides of the same coin. The heavenly perspective, that God is glorified, and the earthly perspective, that we believe, is one coin with two sides. When we believe, God is glorified. And Lazarus died, and Lazarus was dead, and Jesus was glad that he was dead, so that we may believe. So here we go back to the disciples again, verse 16. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellows, let us go also, that we may die with him. Thomas is going to go die with Jesus. Why do we remember Thomas as doubting Thomas instead of bold Thomas? Instead of courageous Thomas going to die with Jesus, he is doubting Thomas. Verse 17, then when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs, that's about 2 miles. And many of the Jews came to Mary and Martha to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then Martha said unto Jesus, Lord, if thou had been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatever so thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. Verse 23, then Jesus said unto her, thy brother shall rise again. Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Then Jesus gives this wonderful, wonderful verse. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. He asks this important question of Martha. Martha, do you believe this? Do you believe this? And look at Martha's answer, verse 27. She said unto him, yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. And so Martha, as she's struggling with her brother's death, she approaches Jesus and she comes into this rich theological discussion. And out of this comes this wonderful I am passage, the 5th I am passage in the Gospel of John, where Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus doesn't say, I know about resurrections, I read a book on resurrections. No, he doesn't say anything like that. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And if we believe in him, we will never die. Continuing here in verse 28, when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, the Master has come and has called for thee. As soon as she heard it, Mary arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus was not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha had met him. Then the Jews which were in her house and comforted her when they saw Mary, that she rose up hastily and went out and followed her, saying, She goeth into the grave to weep there. And when Mary was come where Jesus was, she saw him, she fell down at her feet, saying, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Exact same phrase that her sister Martha said. If only you'd have been here. How many times do we say that to ourselves? If only. With doubts and double takes, there is no if onlys. God is in control. God is controlling, and we trust, we believe. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, Jesus groaned in spirit, and he was troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? And they said unto him, Lord, come see. Verses 35, and Jesus wept. You see, Jesus, when he talked to Martha, Jesus interacted with Martha. When Jesus talked to Mary, he entered into Mary's pain. He entered into Martha's pain in her own way. He entered into Mary's pain in her own way. Jesus knew these ladies. He knows us. He relates to them at a personal, intimate level. And Jesus wept. Jesus wasn't weeping over Lazarus. Jesus knew that he was going to raise him from the dead. Jesus wasn't weeping over Mary and Martha, because they were going to be happy. Jesus was weeping because death had entered into the world. Jesus could look forward and see that we are going to suffer death someday. We are not made to suffer death. That's why this chapter is so precious. Jesus is going to show his power over death. That's what he's going to do. And Jesus, as he looked forward, he saw how death caused so much pain and heartache. These things caused Jesus to weep. Verse 36, Then the Jews said, Behold how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused even this man that he should not have died? You see, the authorities, the people around Mary and Martha, nobody got it. That Jesus has the power over death. Nobody understood this. Verse 38, Jesus therefore again groaning in himself cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. And Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh. King James. For he has been dead 4 days. Notice that Jesus, who's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, needed help to move the stone away. Jesus asked for help to move a simple stone. Jesus wants us involved. Jesus works through people. Jesus works through you and I. And there was a stink there. There was a stink. Martha was right. And the fact is that Jesus wanted the people to smell the stench, to smell the putrefaction that came from that grave, that there would be no doubt whatsoever about his power to raise somebody from the dead. No doubts. 4 days dead. They opened the cave, rolled the stone back, the stench just wafts out. And Jesus wanted them to smell the stench. Continue reading. Jesus said unto her, verse 40, Said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldst see the glory of God? Then they took the stone away from the place where the dead was laid. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I know that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. So Jesus not only wanted them to smell the stench, he wanted them to hear his prayer, to smell, to hear. And when he had spoken thus, he cried out forth with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said, loose him. So not only did Jesus want to smell it, he wanted them to hear it, he wanted them to see it. Jesus wanted them to believe that God may be glorified. Hallelujah. And Jesus said to them, loose him. So Lazarus is hopping out of the tomb. And again, Jesus calls for help. He needs us to come and help Lazarus. Untie him, take off his grave clothes. And many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen these things which Jesus did, believed on him. Hallelujah. You see, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and we're given that example here in John chapter 11, this remarkable chapter. But Lazarus was raised, Lazarus was called backwards when he was raised from the dead. When we are resurrected, we are going to be called forwards. Jesus did this to show us that he has power over death, and that someday those who believed on him will be resurrected to life. This is a foretaste of glory, foretaste of Jesus' power for those who believe on him. Hallelujah.